Good afternoon. I'd like to introduce Dr. Sverre Fidel, who's Professor of Medicine at the University of Washington, and we are talking about air pollution and asthma. So Dr. Fidel, if you already have asthma, is air pollution going to make it worse?
Yeah, I think it's probably one of the easier questions to answer in terms of air pollution research. There's little question that, as opposed to causing asthma, which can sometimes be a little bit more controversial and debatable, in terms of actually, once you have asthma, having it get worse with exposure to air pollution is probably a little less or somewhat less controversial, and the data are generally more convincing. The data about this that are most relevant for having that opinion are based on a large body of human epidemiological work. That is what are called observational studies, where you just go in and look at associations, but are supplemented by a fair amount of work that's done experimentally on human experimental exposures. And although there are limitations to that type of work, it very much complements the observations that are seen in human epidemiological studies.
Are there some pollutants that are more important to monitor than others?
Well, it's a good question. The answer is probably yes, but the problem is we don't know yet which ones. And the reason I say that, if we look at a number of, I'll pick out a series of studies here where we look at a group of asthmatics who are followed for a period of time and measuring something that reflects how well their asthma is doing, such as lung function or symptoms or some other measure, and you try to correlate that with short-term changes in air pollution. So I've listed here three prominent studies that are multi-city studies, and the importance of multi-city is that there's a lot of data there, so that the findings are relatively robust. And if you look at the results of these studies, you find that, yes, they do identify effects of air pollutants, but the pollutants that are identified vary somewhat from study to study. And as a result of that, there probably is not the type of consistency that you need in the findings in order to identify, say, the magic bullet pollutant that causes the ill effects of air pollution. In fact, in different settings, there are different pollutants that are associated with it, and so in some sense it kind of becomes a little bit muddy. The conclusion is, yes, air pollution can worsen things, but which ones are actually playing a role most consistently is hard to say. So that has direct relevance to answering the questions, which pollutants are important to monitor. In some way, it's a moot point, and what I mean by that is that we're already monitoring a number of these pollutants. I guess the question that is still at issue is whether one can enhance a monitoring campaign on a pollutant that one is particularly interested in. A lot of the focus now is on pollutants that are not the typical pollutants that are measured by governmental agencies. So, for example, we monitor particulate matter, but we know that particulate matter is composed of a number of different chemicals. And so the focus now is on specific chemicals, and it may well be that we do want to focus on some of those specific components at some point, but we don't know enough now.
So for the person with asthma who is chronically exposed to air pollution, are they then going to be more sensitive to other triggers?
Yeah, so that's been an interesting question, and we heard in another talk by Peter Perry today how exposure to air pollution can affect the lining of the airways to allow them to be more, to allow allergens, for example, to penetrate into the airways more readily. And so there's mechanistic evidence that would suggest that, yes, the combination of air pollution exposure and another trigger could make things worse. And I've shown, I touched on several examples in which exposure to aeroallergens, for example, are in an experimental setting where there's very little sort of question about other issues being at play, that if you expose someone to air pollution first, and it can be any number of pollutants, it can be nitrogen dioxide or ozone, if you expose them to that pollutant first and then you expose them to the allergen to which they're sensitive, the effects of the allergen are more pronounced. So I think the answer to the question is yes, and I think the fact that these are experiments rather than just epidemiologic studies adds a lot of credence to that. The other sort of trigger that has been very difficult to look at has been viral infections, and that's probably the most important trigger for asthma that there is. And there's very little evidence regarding it, but there is one important study, and it's this study that I'm showing the results of here from a group in Southampton in England, showing that the effect of a viral infection on an asthmatic was worsened in the setting of high nitrogen dioxide exposure. So you see in this plot that we see that in the dark bars you see the effect when nitrogen dioxide is high, and in the lighter gray bars when nitrogen dioxide is low, and you see that the effect on symptoms on the left plot is greater when nitrogen dioxide is high, and on the left plot the reduction in lung function is more when nitrogen dioxide is high. So both in the setting of allergen exposures and in the setting of viral infections, the co-exposure with air pollution does seem to worsen things.
I see. Well, I think that answers my questions, I think.
Okay. Yeah, the middle one.